The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any species in known space. It stretched for miles in every direction. The ceiling was so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it. Thousands of seats rose up in circular rows, and each seat held an ambassador from a different world. Today, all 37 member species had sent their representatives. They came from planets of ice and planets of fire. They came from worlds covered in water and worlds made entirely of metal. Some breathed oxygen, some breathed methane, some did not breathe at all. But despite all their differences, they all shared one thing in common today. They were all afraid. Cole sat in his assigned seat near the back of the chamber. He was the ambassador from Earth, which meant he represented the weakest species in the council. Humans had only been traveling among the stars for about 100 years. They had only been members of the council for 43 years. In galactic terms, they were bobbies. Was 52 years old. He had gray hair and a calm face. Before he became an ambassador, he had been a high school teacher in Ohio. He had spent 20 years teaching math to teenagers who did not want to learn math. That job had taught him patience. It had taught him how to stay calm when everyone around him was upset. It had taught him how to talk to people who did not want to listen. He was going to need all of those skills today. The obsidian doors at the front of the chamber began to open. They moved slowly, like the jaws of some great beast. A cold wind blew through the gap, and the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Every ambassador in the chamber lowered their eyes. Those who had eyes anyway. The ones who had other sensory organs pointed them at the floor instead. No one looked at the doors. No one dared. Watched as the other ambassadors trembled in their seats. The ambassador, a gentle creature made mostly of water who lived inside a special suit, was shaking so badly that ripples spread across his body. The delegation, a group of tall insect-like beings, had pressed themselves as far back into their seats as they could go. One of them was making a high-pitched sound that thought might be crying. Then she entered. Queen of the Empire was 9 feet tall. Her skin was black like volcanic glass, smooth and shiny and cold. Her eyes burned with a pale fire that gave off no warmth. Shadows clung to her body like a living cloak, moving and shifting even when there was no wind. She was 600 years old. She had ruled the empire for 400 of those years. In that time, she had never lost a war. She had never retreated. She had never shown mercy unless it served her purposes. They were the most powerful species in the galaxy. Their empire stretched across 10,000 worlds. Their armies numbered in the billions. Their weapons could destroy entire planets with a single shot. And their queen was the most frightening being in known space. 6 royal guards walked behind her. Each one was 7 feet tall and covered in armor that seemed to drink in the light. Each one carried a weapon that could kill everyone in the chamber in less than a minute. They moved in perfect silence, like shadows with bodies. Queen walked to the center of the chamber and stopped on the main platform. She stood there for a long moment, letting the silence build. The only sound was the quiet hum of the life support systems and the occasional whimper from one of the ambassadors. When she finally spoke, her voice filled the entire room. It was deep and cold, like thunder echoing through a cave of ice. "The Empire has made a decision," she said. "The mining rights to the Velas system will be transferred to our dominion. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact." Knew about the Velas system. It belonged to the water beings who had colonized its moons 300 years ago. The system had 5 moons that were rich in rare minerals and covered in vast oceans. They had built their civilization there. Millions of them called it home. The ambassador, whose name was, made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. His entire body shook inside his hydration suit. Water leaked from his eyes in what recognized as the version of tears. But said nothing. He did not protest. He did not argue, he simply sat there and wept in silence. Queen continued speaking. Any objection to this transfer will be treated as an act of war against the Empire. I trust I do not need to explain what that would mean. She did not need to explain. Everyone in the chamber knew what happened to species that went to war with the. There was a reason the Empire had 10,000 worlds. Most of them had been taken by force. Looked around the room. He saw fear on every face. He saw resignation in every posture. The ambassadors from powerful worlds looked down at their hands. The ambassadors from weak worlds looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. No one was going to say anything. No one ever said anything to Queen. That was just how things worked in this galaxy. The strong took what they wanted and the weak accepted it. Thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 24 years old and worked as a nurse in Cleveland. She spent her days taking care of sick people, holding their hands, telling them everything would be okay. She believed that every life had value, that kindness mattered, that the world could be made better through small acts of compassion. What kind of galaxy would she grow up in if everyone just accepted this? What kind of future was he building for her if he sat here in silence while an entire species lost their home? Had seen bullies before. He had dealt with them in the hallways of his high school for 20 years. He knew that bullies only had power when everyone else was too afraid to stand up to them. He knew that silence was the same as permission. His heart was beating fast. His palms were sweating. A voice in his head told him to stay quiet, to be smart, to not do anything foolish. But another voice, louder and clearer, told him that some things were more important than being safe. Cole raised his hand. The movement was small, just one arm rising slowly into the air. It was the same gesture he had seen 1,000 times in his classroom, the same gesture that students used when they had a question. But in this room, in this moment, it was the most shocking thing that had happened in centuries. The chamber went completely still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Every eye, every sensor, every form of perception turned toward the back of the room where a single human sat with his hand raised. Queen's burning eyes found him. They locked onto him like weapons finding a target. "You," she said, and the single word carried more weight than most sentences. "What are you doing?" Kept his hand up for one more moment, then lowered it slowly. He stood up from his seat. His legs were shaking, but he had learned long ago how to hide his fear. 20 years of teaching had given him that skill. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was calm and steady, "I have a question about the legal basis for your claim to the Velas system." The silence that followed was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Stood in the back row of the council chamber, his hand now at his side, his eyes fixed on the most dangerous being in the galaxy. Queen stared at him. Her pale fire eyes burned with an intensity that made the air around her shimmer. The shadows that clung to her body had gone completely still, like predators waiting to strike. Around the chamber, the other ambassadors had stopped breathing. Some of them looked like they might faint. The delegation was making that high-pitched crying sound again, louder this time. The ambassador had turned his entire body toward, water rippling beneath his suit in what might have been shock or hope or both. "You questioned me," Queen said. It was not a question, it was a statement of disbelief. "I do," replied. He was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Inside, his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The Queen began to move. She stepped down from the central platform, her feet making no sound on the polished floor. Her 6 guards moved with her, their weapons held ready. The shadows around her stretched and shifted like living things. She walked through the chamber slowly, passing row after row of terrified ambassadors. Each one she passed seemed to shrink a little more into their seat. By the time she reached the back of the room, the entire chamber felt smaller, darker, colder. She stopped 10 feet away from. At this distance, He could see details he had not noticed before. Her skin was not just black but seemed to contain depths, like looking into the night sky. Her eyes were not just burning but swirling, with currents of pale fire moving behind them. The shadows around her were not just dark but empty, like holes cut in the fabric of reality. She was beautiful in the way that a storm is beautiful, or a volcano, or a black hole. She was something that humans were not meant to look at directly. Looked at her anyway. "No creature has questioned me in 400 years, Queen said. Her voice was quieter now, but somehow more dangerous. The last one who did was the king of the... Do you know what happened to the... Knew, everyone knew. They had been a proud species with a small but advanced empire. When their king refused to bow to the queen had personally led the fleet that destroyed there. The few who survived now lived as refugees, scattered across a dozen charity worlds. "I know," said. "And yet you stand there," the queen continued. "You do not kneel, you do not beg for mercy, you do not even tremble." "I am trembling," admitted, "just not on the outside." A sound came from Queen that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. It was hard to tell. "What manner of creature are you?" she asked. "The ambassador soiled himself when I entered the chamber. The delegation formally requested permission to flee before I finished speaking. The mighty empire sent their most decorated general to represent them, and he is currently hiding behind his chair. And yet you, a human from a species that has barely learned to walk among the stars, you stand before me as if we were equals." Thought about that for a moment. "Where I come from," he said, "we have a saying, everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time." The queen tilted her head. "I do not understand." "It means that no matter how powerful someone is, they are still just a person. They still wake up in the morning. They still make decisions. They can still be wrong. They can still be reasoned with." "I am not a person," Queen said. "I am the eternal sovereign of the... I have lived for 6 centuries. I have conquered 1,000 worlds. I have destroyed empires that were ancient when your species was still living in caves." "And in all that time," said, "has anyone ever just talked to you?" The queen was silent. Continued. "Not begged, not groveled, not pleaded for their lives or the lives of their people, just talked, had a conversation, treated you like someone they could reason with." The shadows around Queen shifted. Her burning eyes flickered. "No," she said finally, "they have not." Nodded, he took a step closer to the queen, which caused several ambassadors in nearby seats to gasp in horror. Her guards raised their weapons slightly. "Your Majesty," said, "I am not here to fight you. I could not fight you even if I wanted to. My species has one small fleet and a handful of colonies. You could destroy everything we have built without breaking a sweat." "Then why do you speak?" the queen asked. "Why risk the anger of the for a species that is not even your own?" "Because it is the right thing to do," said simply. The queen stared at him for a long moment. Something changed in her expression, though could not say what. The fire in her eyes seemed to dim slightly, as if a wind had blown across it. "The right thing," she repeated. "What do you know of right and wrong, human? Morality is a luxury for the weak. The strong do what they wish and the weak accept it. That is the way of the universe." Shook his head. "I do not believe that, and I do not think you believe it either." A murmur ran through the chamber. Several ambassadors looked like they might actually faint now. No one had ever told Queen what she believed. "You presume to know my mind?" the queen asked, and there was danger in her voice again. "I presume nothing," said. "I observe. You are 600 years old. You have ruled for 400 of those years. In all that time you have taken what you wanted, destroyed what stood in your way, and built the greatest empire this galaxy has ever seen." He paused. "And yet you still come to these council meetings. You still announce your demands in front of witnesses. You still give species the chance to object, even if no one ever does. Why?" Queen did not answer. "If you truly believe that might makes right," continued, You would not bother with councils and declarations. You would simply take what you wanted without warning. The fact that you are here, talking to us, means that some part of you still believes in something beyond raw power. The chamber was so quiet that could hear his own heartbeat. Queen turned away from him. She walked a few steps toward the center of the room, her back to him. Her shadows trailed behind her like a cape made of darkness. "You are either very brave," she said without turning around, "or very foolish." "Probably both," admitted. The queen was silent for another long moment. Then she turned her head, looking at him over her shoulder. "Tell me about your species," she said. "Tell me about humans." Blinked. Of all the things he had expected her to say, that was not on the list. "What would you like to know?" he asked. "Everything," Queen said. "Tell me why a creature from a species that has only been among the stars for a century would stand before the most powerful being in the galaxy and dare to tell her she is wrong." Thought about his daughter. He thought about his students. He thought about all the people back on Earth who were counting on him to represent them well. "How much time do you have?" he asked. And somewhere, deep in the shadows around Queen, something that might have been a smile appeared. "I have all the time in the universe," she said. Reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was old and worn, with creases from years of being carried and unfolded. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and a warm smile that looked very much like his own. "This is my daughter," he said, holding up the photograph so Queen could see it. She is 24 years old." The Queen turned to look at the picture. Her burning eyes studied the small human face in the image. "She works as a nurse in a hospital in a city called Cleveland," continued. "Every day she takes care of sick people. She holds their hands when they are scared. She talks to them when they are lonely. She cries when they die and celebrates when they get better." He lowered the photograph but kept it in his hand. "She does not get paid very much. She works long hours. The job is hard and often thankless, but she does it anyway because she believes that every life has value. She believes that helping people is its own reward." Queen said nothing, but she was listening. The entire chamber was listening. "My species is called human," said. "We come from a small blue planet called Earth, in a quiet corner of the galaxy. We have only been traveling among the stars for about 100 years. Before that, we spent thousands of years fighting each other." He began to walk slowly across the floor, not toward the Queen but parallel to her, as if he was a teacher walking in front of a classroom. "We had wars that lasted for years. We had wars that lasted for decades. We built weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. We actually used those weapons on each other. Twice." A murmur ran through the chamber. The other species had heard of human violence, but few knew the details. "We killed millions of our own kind," continued. "We enslaved each other based on the color of our skin. We persecuted each other based on which gods we believed in. We committed terrible acts of cruelty that we are still ashamed of today." He stopped walking and turned to face the Queen. "If you judged us only by our history, you would think we were monsters. You would think we were a species that only knew how to destroy, and you would be partly right." The shadows around Queen shifted slightly. "But that is not the whole story," said. "Because while we were fighting and killing and destroying, we were also creating. We painted pictures that made people weep with their beauty. We wrote stories that have been told for 3,000 years. We composed music that can bring a room full of strangers to tears." He put the photograph of his daughter back in his pocket. "We built hospitals where we healed the sick, even when we did not know them. We built schools where we taught children to read and think and dream. We built libraries where we stored all the knowledge we had gathered, so that future generations would not have to start from nothing." Looked around the chamber at all the frightened faces watching him. "And slowly, painfully, over many centuries, we began to learn. We learned that war costs more than it gains. We learned that enemies can become friends. We learned that the measure of a civilization is not how powerful it is, but how it treats those who cannot fight back. He turned back to Queen. We are not perfect. We still make mistakes. We still hurt each other sometimes. But every generation, we try to be a little better than the one before. Every century, we get a little closer to the people we want to be. Queen tilted her head. And what kind of people do you want to be? People who solve problems with words instead of weapons, said. People who see someone in need and offer to help. People who believe that tomorrow can be better than today if we work hard enough to make it so. The Queen was silent for a moment. You speak of kindness and compassion, she said, but those are weaknesses. They are tools that the strong use to control the weak. No, said firmly. They are strengths that only the strong have the courage to show. He stepped closer to the Queen, close enough that her shadows could almost touch him. It takes no strength to destroy. Destruction is easy. Any fool with a weapon can destroy, but creation is hard. Building is hard. Teaching is hard. Healing is hard. These things require patience and effort and love. Love, Queen repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. Yes, love, said. The thing that makes my daughter wake up every morning and go to a difficult job for little pay. The thing that makes parents sacrifice for their children. The thing that makes strangers risk their lives to save people they have never met. He gestured around the chamber. Look at these people, Your Majesty. Look at all these ambassadors from all these different worlds. They are terrified of you. They have spent so long being afraid that they have forgotten how to do anything else. They cannot think clearly. They cannot speak honestly. They can only bow and scrape and hope that you do not notice them. Queen's eyes moved across the chamber, seeing what was describing. Is that really what you want? Asked. To rule over a galaxy of cowards. To be surrounded by creatures who are too scared to look you in the eye. To spend the next 400 years listening to flattery and lies because no one dares to tell you the truth. The Queen was silent. You have more power than any being in this galaxy, continued. You could use that power to crush anyone who opposes you, but you could also use it to build something new, something that lasts, something that future generations will remember with gratitude instead of fear. And why would I want that? Queen asked. Smiled. It was the patient smile of a teacher who had just seen a student ask the right question. Because you are tired, he said. You have been playing the same game for 400 years, and you have won every time. But winning has become boring. Power has become meaningless when there is no one left to challenge you. You come to these council meetings hoping that someone will say something interesting, do something unexpected, give you a reason to feel alive. The shadows around the Queen grew darker. And today, said, someone finally did. He held out his hand, palm up, toward the most dangerous being in the galaxy. My name is Cole, he said. I am just a former teacher from a small planet called Earth. I am not special. I am not powerful. I am not important. But I believe that talking is better than fighting, and I believe that even the greatest enemy can become a friend. His hand remained extended. Would you like to have a conversation, Your Majesty? A real one, where you do not have to pretend and I do not have to bow. I think you might enjoy it. The chamber held its breath. Queen looked at the small human hand reaching toward her. It was so tiny compared to her own clawed fingers, so fragile, she could destroy it with a thought. Instead, she reached out and took it. Her touch was cold, like holding ice, but it did not hurt. Her fingers wrapped around his with a gentleness that surprised him. Very well, Cole of Earth, she said. Let us have a conversation. The Queen released his hand and stepped back. The shadows around her had changed. They were still dark, still deep, but they no longer seemed hungry. They moved slowly now, like clouds drifting across a peaceful sky. You want to know about humans, said. But first I would like to know about you. Not the Queen, not the conqueror, just you. Queen was silent for a long moment. The other ambassadors in the chamber remained frozen in their seats, not daring to move or speak. They watched this impossible conversation like they were watching a dream. "I do not remember the last time anyone asked me that," the Queen finally said. Her voice was softer now, less like thunder and more like distant rain. "Then perhaps it is time someone did," replied. The Queen turned away from him and walked toward the center of the chamber. She moved slowly, thoughtfully, her clawed feet making no sound on the polished floor. "When I was young," she began, "before I became queen, before I conquered my first world, I lived in my father's palace. He was the king then. He was feared across the empire, though his power was nothing compared to what I would later gain." Listened without interrupting. Around the chamber, the other ambassadors leaned forward slightly, drawn in by something they had never witnessed before. The Queen was speaking of herself, not of her conquests or her power, but of her past. "There was a servant in the palace," Queen continued. "A small creature from a species whose name I no longer remember. She was barely intelligent by our standards. Her entire purpose was to clean the floors and prepare the meals and do whatever was asked of her." The Queen stopped walking. She stood in the center of the platform, her back to. "I fell ill when I was 200 years old. A fever burned through my body. Our physicians tried everything they knew, but nothing worked. The fever grew worse. I began to lose consciousness for longer and longer periods. Eventually, the physicians gave up. They told my father that I would die within days." Her shadows moved slowly around her. "My father was a practical man. He began preparing my funeral rites. My brothers and sisters came to say their goodbyes, though I could tell they were already thinking about how my death would change their own positions in the succession. Even my mother only visited once before deciding that watching me die was too unpleasant." Felt a strange sadness in his chest. Despite everything he knew about this being, despite all the terrible things she had done, he could not help but feel sorry for the young princess she had once been. "But the servant stayed," Queen said. "This tiny, insignificant creature who cleaned floors. She stayed by my side day and night. She cooled my brow with water. She sang songs from her, even though I could barely hear them. She told me stories to keep my mind from surrendering to the darkness." The Queen turned around to face. "I survived," she said. "Against all expectations, the fever broke after 3 weeks. I recovered completely. The physicians called it a miracle. My father said it was proof that I was destined for greatness." "But you knew the truth," said. "Yes," the Queen agreed. "I knew that a servant had saved my life. When I was strong enough to speak, I asked her why she had stayed, why she had risked her own health to care for someone who had never shown her any kindness, who had barely acknowledged her existence." "What did she say?" Queen's burning eyes met. "She said that every life has value, and that kindness costs nothing." The chamber was completely silent, not the fearful silence from before, but something else, something almost sacred. "I rewarded her," the Queen continued. "I gave her a position of honor in the palace. For decades she was treated well. She was happy, I think." Her voice grew heavy. "And then, 90 years later, there was a rebellion. Her species was deemed disloyal to the empire. My advisors recommended that all of them be eliminated as a warning to others. I signed the order without thinking. I had forgotten her name by then. I had forgotten what she had done for me." Saw something in the Queen's eyes that he would not have believed possible an hour ago. He saw regret. "She was among those who died," Queen said. "I did not learn this until years later when I happened to review the records of that period. By then, it was too late to apologize, too late to undo what I had done, too late for anything except memory." She looked around the chamber at all the frightened faces staring at her. "I have ruled for 400 years, she said. "I have conquered and destroyed and taken whatever I wished. I have made the empire the greatest power this galaxy has ever known. And in all that time, I have never felt what I felt when that servant saved my life." Her shadows darkened. "I have never felt gratitude. I have never felt connection. I have only felt fear. Not my own fear, but the fear of everyone around me. It is reflected in every eye that looks at me. It is present in every voice that speaks to me. It has become so constant that I barely notice it anymore." She turned back to, "Until today, until you raised your hand and spoke to me as if I were just another being, not a queen, not a conqueror, not a monster, just someone you could talk to." Nodded slowly. "Everyone deserves to be talked to like that, even you." "Why?" the queen asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. "Why would you offer me kindness when I have shown none to others? Why would you risk your life to have a conversation with the being who has killed more than anyone else in galactic history?" Thought about the question carefully before answering. "Because I do not believe that anyone is beyond redemption," he said. "I have seen the worst students become the best teachers. I have seen the bullies become the kindest friends. I have seen people change in ways that no one thought possible." He took a step toward her. "You are 600 years old. You have done terrible things, but you are still here. You still have time. You could spend the rest of your life making up for what you have done, or you could spend it doing more of the same. The choice is yours." Queen looked at him with those burning eyes. "And if I choose to continue as I have been, if I take the Vila's system and crush thee and destroy anyone who stands in my way?" "Then that is your choice," said, "but you will be alone, you will be feared, and you will never again feel what you felt when that servant saved your life." The queen was silent for a long time. The shadows around her shifted and swirled, darkening and lightening in turn. Finally she spoke. "You are a strange creature, coal of earth." "I have been called worse," he replied. And somewhere, deep in the shadows around Queen, something that had been dead for a very long time began to stir. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had seen many things over the centuries. It had witnessed treaties signed and wars declared. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had heard speeches that changed the course of history. But it had never seen anything like this. Queen stood in the center of the platform, her burning eyes closed. The shadows around her had grown still. For the first time that anyone could remember, she looked almost peaceful. Waited. He had learned long ago that the most important part of a conversation was knowing when to be silent. Some moments needed space to breathe. This was one of them. When the queen finally opened her eyes, they seemed different somehow. The fire was still there, but it was gentler now, less like a weapon and more like a hearth. "I have made a decision," she said. The chamber tensed. Every ambassador held their breath. The ambassador closed his eyes and waited for the worst. Queen turned to face the assembled representatives of 37 species. "The Empire withdraws its claim to the Vila's system," she announced. Her voice was just as powerful as before, but it carried a different weight now. "The May keep their moons." For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, impossible to believe, then made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Water flowed from his eyes in streams of joy. Around the chamber, whispers began to spread. Ambassadors looked at each other in disbelief. But Queen was not finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "the Empire proposes a new relationship with the galactic community. For too long, we have seen ourselves as rulers and you as subjects. We have taken what we wanted without asking. We have destroyed what stood in our way without regret." She paused, her burning eyes sweeping across the chamber. "This will change. They will remain strong. We will still protect our interests and defend our borders. But we will no longer seek to conquer for the sake of conquest. We will no longer destroy for the sake of destruction." The shadows around her began to lighten. "Instead, we will build. We will trade. We will cooperate. It has been a long time since we created anything new. It has been a long time since we had allies instead of subjects. Perhaps it is time we remembered how." She turned back to, "You have done something today that no army could accomplish," she said. "You have reminded me of something I lost a very long time ago." "What is that, Your Majesty?" asked. "Hope," she said simply. Smiled. It was the same smile he had given to thousands of struggling students over the years, the smile that said everything would be okay. "Hope is not something that can be lost forever," he said. "It can be buried, it can be forgotten, but it always survives somewhere deep inside. All it needs is a reason to come back." Queen nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right, human, perhaps you are right." She raised one clawed hand and her shadows responded. They swirled around her, then shot outward in all directions, touching every corner of the chamber. But instead of bringing darkness, they brought warmth. Instead of cold, they brought comfort. The ambassadors gasped as the shadows passed through them. They felt no fear. For the first time in centuries, the touch of the brought no pain. "This is my gift to you," Queen said. "A promise of the change to come. They have much to learn about kindness. We have much to learn about cooperation, but we are willing to try." She looked at one last time. "And we have a former teacher from Earth to thank for showing us the way." The chamber erupted into applause. It started small, just a few ambassadors clapping their appendages together. But it grew quickly, spreading through the rows until the entire room was filled with the sound of celebration. Ambassador rushed forward, his hydration suit sloshing with each step. He reached and threw his arms around him in a wet embrace. "Thank you," said, water streaming from his eyes. "Thank you for my people, thank you for our home." Patted the ambassador's back gently. Anyone would have done the same. "No," said firmly. "No one would have, no one has, only you." Other ambassadors began to approach, each one wanting to thank the human who had done the impossible. The delegation made their high-pitched sounds, but now they sounded like joy instead of fear. The general came out from behind his chair and offered a formal salute. Even the small, scared creatures who had been invisible in the corners of the room came forward to touch hands. Queen watched all of this from her platform. Her shadows danced around her in patterns that might have been pleasure or might have been peace. When the celebration began to quiet, she spoke once more. "There is much work to be done," she said. "Treaties to be written, relationships to be built, trust to be earned. It will not happen quickly, it will not happen easily, but it will happen." She descended from the platform and walked through the crowd of ambassadors. They parted before her, but this time it was out of respect rather than fear. She stopped in front of and looked down at him. "You spoke of kindness costing nothing," she said, "but you were wrong about that. Kindness cost me an empire of fear. It cost me 400 years of certainty." Met her burning eyes without flinching. Was it worth the price? Queen was silent for a moment. Then she did something that had not been seen in living memory. She smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible on her obsidian face, but it was real. "Ask me again in 100 years," she said. "I suspect the answer will be yes." She turned and walked toward the obsidian doors, her guards falling into step behind her. But before she left, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "Coal of Earth," she called out. "When you return to your planet, give my regards to your daughter. Tell her that a servant once saved the life of a monster, and that monster has finally remembered to be grateful." Then she was gone, the doors closing behind her with a sound like distant thunder. Stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by grateful ambassadors and the echoes of history. He thought about back on Earth, about what he would tell her when he got home. He thought about all the students he had taught over the years, about all the times he had wondered if his lessons had made any difference. Today he knew they had. That night a message was sent across the galaxy. It was transmitted to every member world of the Council, to every ship in the trade lanes, to every station and outpost and colony. It spoke of a new era, of change and hope and the possibility of a better future. And at the bottom of the message, in small text that most species overlooked, was a simple phrase that humans had been saying to each other for thousands of years. Tomorrow can be better. For the first time in galactic history, the other species were starting to believe it. And it was all because one former teacher from Ohio had remembered that even the most terrifying monsters were still just people who needed someone to talk to them. The stars seemed a little brighter that night, and somewhere, in a palace at the heart of the empire, a queen who had not slept peacefully in centuries closed her burning eyes and dreamed of kindness. The universe was changing, and it all started with one raised hand.